we do for birth trauma, how we actually address it is we look at adult life or we look at child behavior and we start to notice where are the struggles. And then we want to trace the echo back to the birth story. And some people don't know consciously their birth, but their body knows. And I can tell you, as a somatic psychologist, a body-centered psychotherapist, I help people learn to feel their body and take what's called implicit memory and bring it to the surface. Implicit memory is precognitive, but it registers in our experience and in our brain. In our cells, really, we call it cellular memory. When it becomes explicit is when people start to struggle because they don't have the context. Under a certain amount of stress, these early stressors are reappearing. And the defense mechanisms set up as an infant are what people are trying to use, because they're deep in the brainstem. They don't allow us to cognitively stay in present time and handle stress. They create overwhelm, they create protective response behavior, they create dissociation, and it creates in the parts of the brain. Everybody put your hands right here on your forehead, sides of your head. On the right side is your right amygdala, so rub that a little bit. On your left side is your left amygdala, rub that a little bit. See if you can massage your amygdala. The amygdala is awake starting in embryology. When you're a prenate, this part of the brain is awake. So then what happens is its job is to scan for danger or safety, but danger, it's going to watch out. Now, the right one is the one that gets really active and aroused and stressed. So what you want to do, I like to pass on geeky somatic tools. What you want to do is cross the rainbow bridge between the amygdala. There's literally some tissue and you can imagine taking some of that activation arousal and sending it to the left side. So see if you can do that, even if you imagine it. From the highly aroused, we just send it left. I'm reading a book that the foreword is by the Dalai Lama and the Pope, and it's about mysticism in the brain. And I love the geeky neuroscience because the amygdala is what gets aroused and sets up stress response behaviors related to birth or post-birth experience, such as circumcision or surgeries or NIC unit care. And we don't want those. And then all of that creates a little file cabinet where we pull out a filter of our behavioral response. And perceptually, we're looking through the filter of a time when we felt extremely vulnerable. We don't want to do that as a grown-up. We don't want to feel like life is life-threatening. And we don't want to have to revert. I mean, I have to say this because in the pre and perinatal field, one of the healing modalities is to provide safety and comfort. Now, some people, as they get the safety and comfort, they learn to regress and they stay regressed. And they want the world to be this sweet, soft, nice place, or they judge the world. That's not reality. And so you want to be able to heal your birth trauma.
You guys let us know that stuff I've been carrying the whole trip. And then he
Let's see if I can figure. Oh, good. Thank you. Welcome. You want to heal the birth trauma and you want to grow up. Those are the goals of healing birth trauma, that you can cellularly recalibrate the stressors that happen to your infant experience and not have it trigger reactive responses in your behavior. And it's possible. That's what I love about sharing this work is you literally can, with compassion and understanding, help your brain reorganize and your brain give context to what the precognitive self doesn't know. The brain relaxes when it has context. And so when you can say to the brain, oh, that's my birth trauma, the brain goes, okay, it's not the end of the world. It's not life-threatening. I'm not being born right now at this age. Okay. The brain starts to relax a little and you get a little more space. Just like with a breathing ball, if our cells get rigid, our mental body's going to take over. And you're going to get ahead of yourself. That is not good. You need the whole body. You need your breath. Everybody take a moment, find your back body, whatever that means to you. Feel the support of your back body. See if you can actually, it's almost like leaning into the amniotic sac when you're an embryo. It's like, there's that whole back support. Then find your front body support. See if you can kind of do a little spinal motion in between arching and curling, front body, back body. And then find your side bodies. Get a little width. Can you feel? And then the last plane of spatial dimension that we'll talk about is upper and lower. So let your uppers rest on your lowers. We have push with the head, reach with the head. We have push with the tail, reach with the tail. We have spinal motions. And then finally, just add a little spiral through your spine. Yeah. So the goal of healing birth trauma is to grow up. Imagine that. But with compassion and understanding. The methods of healing birth trauma are to actually slow down your quick brain, interrupt your defense structures, start to identify them, and interrupt them and replace them with regulating body tools, meaning your breath. That's a regulating tool. Letting yourself know that, I'm experiencing some of my birth shock right now. It's just explicit memory and it feels uncomfortable. That's my little chemicals that didn't get processed actually metabolizing. That's why I'm feeling it now. It's like a cellular flashback. It's not psychological, it's sensate. And if you can tolerate the sensate flashback and know what it is, give it a name, the brain relaxes. And that's what we want. We want a little space and a little understanding and a little knowledge that we survived. Then you want to put on your detective hat. What are the things that keep recurring in my life that I don't like? What are the adult behaviors that echo all the way back to a compromised infant? We want to also imagine, what did the infant feel? Like I had to imagine, what was it like to be in an incubator? What was it like when my mom no longer came to the hospital because she had to go home and take care of my sister? What was it like to have a feeding schedule so that when I was hungry, hi Mark, when I was hungry, there was no food coming. So how did my body deal with that arousal? And what happens? And when you start to become the detective and you understand physiology, you start to realize, wow, that hungry infant is going to build up its, it's going to get aroused, it's going to cry, and ideally someone picks up the baby and feeds it or gives it contact or warms it. But if that arousal spikes and it can't go, there's no relief, the baby will get exhausted. That exhaustion then becomes depression. So there's such a thing as infant depression or too much isolation for an infant. That's depressing. Now, the biggest learning I had as a clinician, and gratitude to all the children I've worked with and their parents who have come to me to heal child behavior, and we realize, oh, this is actually birth trauma. These sensory arousal issues are actually rooted in trauma experienced by the body mind that doesn't have a context for it. And so it's using the same protective behavior responses it did then. And that's what we want to interrupt. And this even happens prenatally. Some of the children I've worked with were children who, they came from a situation where the father was violent and they didn't even meet their father. They were the mother was pregnant, but the father was violent, was removed from the home, and the child grew up never knowing their dad. But all of a sudden they're expressing all this violence all the time in their play. Where's that come from? It has to come from experience. And so if you can be the detective of, wow, where do my beliefs come from? Why do I make this meaning of that experience? And then you learn that infants, this is what I learned from the children, that they create identity beliefs. And that's the gold mine of healing. When you can realize that you may be operating from identity beliefs that were based on a moment in time, they're not really accurate. So a baby who is having a bad experience can think they are bad. And this little 6-year-old I was treating who was premature and all the tubes up her nose and everything. And luckily her parents still could hold her. But she brought in a little card to our treatment. She made a little card, and on each page was a picture of a little, baby in a box, basically her incubator, with big tears. And on every page it said, bad, bad baby. Next page, I turn it over. There's a crying baby, bad baby. And then finally on the back page, I am such a bad girl. Oh, that's heartbreaking. Babies aren't bad. Where did she get this idea? It wasn't from her family. They didn't say, oh, you're a bad kid. They were actually a very proactive, supportive family. But she had that encoded in her system. I always like to think about how brilliant we are and how our body mind will do whatever it can to help us understand life. So here, if you understand, let's do a little mini neuroscience lesson. Take your right hand. This is your sympathetic nervous system. This is play and excitement, movement. Yeah. Then take your left hand, and this is rest and digest. Yeah. It's like comfort, rest and digest. Yeah. So the ability to rest into yourself or rest into an enjoyable moment, rest and digest. So we have sympathetic and parasympathetic. That's the main bridge of the autonomic nervous system. And we want to balance these activities. So when we play hard, we want to rest. You know, when we've rested enough, we want more stimulation. That's how it works. And then we have also a social component because we're mammals. So we're going to be curious with others. So we always say, is the field safe? And this is when you start looking at the birth field as an environment, or the prenatal field as an environment. So these are the puzzle pieces of healing birth trauma. The method is to notice what you do now that either works for you or doesn't. If you're afraid of promotions, if you never want an ending to happen, if you jump from one thing to the next, it's likely that you have some dissociation or some confusion, because this nervous system, under stress, everybody take your breathing ball, feel the movement, get your breath going, and then freeze. Notice what that feels like. Can you feel what happens to your breath? The longer you do it, your brain's going to take over. So then add a little breath, but notice how rigid you feel inside after freezing. So shake it out. Get a little refreshment. Stretch your arms. Whoa. That freeze in the nervous system is the root signature of trauma. What it means is sensory didn't get to motor. We call that the sensory motor loop. Sensation comes in and we respond to it. And that's what refreshes us. If sensation comes in and we freeze, we're going to go somewhere in our brain. Or for some of the kids, the spine's frozen, but the sensory comes in and they motor real fast. That's what I think is at the root of ADHD. The kids have a freeze response and sensory, and they motor, sense and motor, and they're just fragmented. Now, here's another fun thing. Imagine here you are with your breathing, Paul. Let's stretch a little bit. I don't want to put you in overwhelm and shock. So play with me if you want to, but don't get overwhelmed, okay? We have to resource our breathing ball. So find your breathing ball. Now freeze. Now imagine if you had more energy pushing against a freeze. It's like throwing a rock at ice or throwing a rock at a mirror. What do you think happens? If you throw a rock at a mirror, it breaks into a bunch of pieces. And there are all these shiny pieces. That's what fragmentation is. A creative consciousness that jumps from one ice floe to the other so the predator won't catch you. So when there's danger and you feel overwhelmed, you're going to create a bunch of, pieces, and maybe one of the pieces will survive. It's a brilliant psychological mechanism. And I call that fragmentation. I've identified 4 types of dissociation related to all this. The fragmentation is the motoring one. More energy comes and you fragment. And then somebody's busy chasing you all over the place. Now, the healing for that is to condense it back together. Like getting, I'll say to the kid, oh, get a butterfly net and let's catch all the pieces of you. Or let's get a hula hoop, or I'm going to go out to the edge of the universe and I'm going to slowly, slowly bring you back together. There you are, slowly, slowly. And literally they start to settle. It's a wonderful thing. Another kind of dissociation is, the movement you have, and maybe they happen together. I'm still studying, but there's a withdrawal into a cave. How many of you give me a 1 if you, under pressure, you withdraw? Put a 1 in the chat or raise your finger. Under pressure, withdraw. That's common. It's not so great. What there, it's like going in, that's parasympathetic shock. Fragmentation is sympathetic. Remember the moving side? That's the sympathetic. That's fragmentation. Parasympathetic is the withdrawal. And so people withdraw into a cave. And with the children, I have to teach them. First thing I have to do is I have to say, can I put my hand at the back of the cave so you're not all alone? Because when they're all alone in their shock, it's overwhelming. But if I can just put my hand at the back of the cave, they can start to warm up a little. And then slowly, slowly, they learn to come to the mouth of the cave and look. So slowly, slowly, I'm helping them go from a parasympathetic depressive to some movement, some curiosity. Now, sometimes people go into an inner cave. Sometimes they go into the field around them, like they get lost in space. So it can be an inner dissociation or an outer dissociation. In the extreme of the parasympathetic shock, it creates what I call sneaky power. Doesn't that sound fun? Give me a 1 in the chat if you feel like you use sneaky power to get your way. Sneaky power is a little bit of a manipulation system. And it happens when we've been all the way, the brain does not like the parasympathetic depression. Too much parasympathetic depression, and the brain thinks you're dying because you're getting more and more, less and less movement. And pretty soon the brain gets the signal, this is not good. So what happens is a last ditch rush of adrenaline. Wake up, move. And that's when sneaky power gets born. It's like, oh, I'm bigger than life. I have magical powers fueled by adrenaline. And you see that, what I thought about is the baptism. And don't get me wrong, this isn't about religion. This is about the physiology of the body. So the baptism that would hold people underneath the water until they couldn't breathe, and then they'd flail and come up and, oh, praise God, right? They'd have this rush. And I see spiritual teachers teach from that charismatic place. It's not a good place to get seduced into. It's very charismatically seductive because it's got the endocrine system, which is our addictive system. And that's why people who are seeking spiritual salvation often aren't grounded. Or they keep seeking spiritual salvation, but they don't go through their own healing. They do all this spiritual healing, but they're not in the body healed. So that's why I love working with birth trauma. So we've learned a few things. You've gotten sort of an overview. Let me give you one solid tool to start this process. We talked about the method. We talked about naming your infant experience. The biggest tool is slowing down when activated. 6 to 10 times slower interrupts the high arousal. And then you add breath and you turn your head and you reorient, because birth is about orienting to safety and present time. And if our brain is in a locked in place, we're using our old filters. Now I have this PowerPoint, which I'm going to just run through really fast. And in it, put your questions in the chat, because that's a place. If you don't know what that means, there's a little thing at the bottom of your Zoom that says chat. And you can go there and you can write things. So here, I'm going to just share my screen for a moment and show you this. And I will, I'll record this and I'll put it up on YouTube and you can watch it again, so you don't have to worry about that. But I want you to see some of the sort of pieces behind the puzzle here.